2 of Who the Hell Did I Rent From? So where we last left off, we'd gone to hospital, had our baby, come back home to an unfinished house. Notably, 3 things had not been finished. 1, the window in the study, which our landlord had assured us had been delivered, had been removed and not replaced. What they left in its place was a, I kid you not, flapping plastic bag that just flapped in the wind. In the living room was firmer piece of plastic, so it was actually hard. They put plastic on that window where they'd found the problem. And then in the kitchen, which will be important later on, the door between the kitchen and outside didn't open. So we get back to the house, and honestly, we just felt extremely anxious and uncomfortable. We're like, we need to finish this work as soon as possible. And what was the push for us was that we got a tornado watch in our area. And the day after that, my husband called the landlord and was like, look, we need to get this fixed ASAP. How long do you need? The landlord said it was going to be 3 days, but let's say 5 days max. My husband was like, great. Can you put us in an Airbnb? Because we can't be here with the dust with a newborn. So eventually the landlord reluctantly agrees. Emphasis on reluctantly. And fast forward like 2 weeks and we go to this Airbnb, and it was horrific. I woke up one night and there was a shadow on the floor. I was waking up to breastfeed. I turned my light on and it's a cockroach. Clearly, there were just roaches in that house. It was so gross. Also bear in mind that Miami's expensive. So what you pay in rent is not going to equal the same standard of what you'll get with an Airbnb. Airbnbs for the same quality will be much more expensive. And we were trying to like slum it to help our landlord. Mistake. I'm like, it's 5 days, like we can do this, it's fine. On the 4th day, the landlord calls my husband and says, hey, so I've got some bad news. It's still not finished and ready for you. So we're gonna need you to extend by another like 5 or 6 days. And I was livid. I was like, what is going on? Like, what are they doing? So we extend the Airbnb by another 5 days or whatever it was. And grinning and bearing it, dying to go back home the day before we're meant to go back home. Again, the landlord calls my husband and says, hey, so bad news, it's still not ready and we need you out for like another like 5 or 6 days. And at this point I was just like, this is insane that this is happening with a newborn baby. So the Airbnb we're in is fully booked for the next 5 days. So I was like, we have to find a new Airbnb. At this point, I was so frustrated that I was like, we're getting a good Airbnb. Even if we have to pitch in money for it, I cannot stay in a house like this again with my newborn baby. So we ended up getting a much nicer Airbnb that was more expensive, and that will be important later on. I'll come back to that. And we move to this Airbnb. Bear in mind, we have all of our stuff with us. So we've got my dog's crate, we have my baby's crib, we have all my baby's bottle stuff, my pump parts. Like we have so much stuff that we had to move to the first Airbnb, and now we're having to move it to the second Airbnb. We're in this new Airbnb, and throughout this time, we'd kind of been stopping off at home just to see what the progress had been. And we'd been told 2 things. First, that all of our furniture would be covered and protected so that dust wouldn't get onto it. Second, we'd been told that there'd be supervision throughout. I went a few times, my husband went a few times, and things were not covered. Dust was just literally blowing in. You would do this to the table and white would come up. And not only that, but there was no supervision. So I spoke to the landlord and I said, look, first of all, our stuff hasn't been covered, so you're gonna need to pay to have it cleaned and to have the vents cleaned. And second of all, like, we would really appreciate if you could have someone there to supervise. To the first point around cleaning the furniture, when I told him that the vents, for example, were gonna cost $500 to clean, because originally we were gonna pay for this, but when we saw that things were uncovered, we were like, you need to cover this because your team didn't cover our furniture. When I told him it was $500, he was like, I could get that for half the price. That's ridiculous. And I was like, so hold on, when you thought we were paying for it, you kept your network of affordable contractors to yourself, but now that you think you're paying for it, you know people who are cheaper. Great, understood. His guy couldn't do it in time, so we ended up going with the person that we'd originally booked, which I'll come back to again. And second, on the point of supervision, he said, well, what do you think is gonna happen? And I said, well, I don't know, like theft, damage, like we don't know these people in our house and there's no one watching them. All of our stuff is there. And he goes, something gone missing? Has something been stolen? And I said, well, I don't think so. And he said, well, then what's the problem? You need to hide all of your valuables. That's the solution. Take your valuables with you. And if you want to put cameras and you use your cameras, fine. Like nothing we could do. So as we're progressing to the end of this second stint of work and we're in this last Airbnb, the landlord calls my husband. And as a side note, the landlord didn't like to get things in writing. If ever you wrote to him, he would call you, which is another red flag and something that I learned to always get everything in writing. He called my husband and was like, look, they want to do the garage. No one had spoken to us about doing the garage. So my husband was like, no, could you do it like in a few months' time, like after everything's done. And the landlord said, look, I need you to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. The workers have said that they will not finish the job unless they can also do the garage. Do you really think the workers said that? I was just so skeptical about everything he was saying at this point. What could we say? So of course we were like, fine. So I spoke to the landlord again. It was so frustrating. Like, he was so patronizing to me. He said this exact phrase. He said, we're all grown-ups here. We have to take responsibility for our decisions, and there has to be some shared responsibility here. And I'm thinking, what shared responsibility? We agreed to a week of work. You are project managing this. It's your people that you've hired. It's your team. And this has turned into a circus. We had moved all of our stuff into the garage thinking that they were not doing the garage. No one had told us they were doing the garage. So all of our stuff was in the garage. And I said, look, it's fine, but can you please let me know when they're doing the garage? Because if they need to move this stuff, I want to be there because our belongings are in the garage. Do you think they let me know? Of course not. They just moved our stuff without asking me. They didn't tell me they were going. It just felt, the whole thing felt like such a violation. Like, this is our home, and it felt like they didn't care. It felt like they had no consideration for us. And at this point as well, I was feeling like a nag. Like, I feel like I was asking for very basic things, and they were just either ignoring me or acting like I was being unreasonable. So we thought we were leaving for like up to 5 days. We ended up having to stay in an Airbnb for 16 days. We come home and the furniture was cleaned, the vents were cleaned while we were gone. And the house manager made a point of messaging our group chat about the house to say that he'd spoken to the vent cleaner, and the vent cleaner had said that it was an unnecessary clean because there was nothing in the vents. I was kind of like, that feels like a weird thing for someone to say who's just cleaned the vents, to say that their clean was unnecessary. So I emailed the company and said, like, what did you find? They responded and said that they did find construction dust. So for me, with a newborn, finding a little bit of construction dust in the vents that we're breathing is too much. So I didn't say anything. I just kept that in the back of my mind. I'm just editing this video. And one thing I wanted to add is that our landlord was very particular about chemicals when it came to his family. So when we moved into the house, we asked for it to be fumigated. And he basically was like, we don't like to use chemicals on our lawn or in the house. Do you mind if we use like an all natural one? So it was interesting that he was happy for us to live in a house that had construction dust, but when it came to his family, they didn't use chemicals. Anyway, okay, back to the story. Again, my husband and I always try and take the high road, so we decided that we were going to pay for half of the second Airbnb because it was more expensive. We paid for the furniture cleaning, we paid for the air vent cleaning. So this was thousands of dollars at this point that we had spent out of pocket that we should not have had to spend. Honestly, we didn't feel comfortable asking the landlord for anything anymore. He was getting very kind of, I want to say, like, aggressive with us and just acting like we were being super unreasonable. It was horrible. And not only that, but just the way he was talking to me in particular as well. Like, I don't think he would speak to my husband the way he spoke to me, saying things like, we're all grown-ups here. Like, what a patronizing, condescending thing to say to someone. We get back to the house and the 2 windows had been put in, which were great, but the door was still not working. And this ends up being important later on. When I was paying for everything, because I was kind of managing it, I was in like a postpartum haze, and I accidentally overpaid the landlord back by a few $100s. When he asked us for a breakdown of what we paid and for receipts, I told him this, and I was like, we overpaid, but our intention originally had been to just like walk. We were like, we don't want to ask him for the money back. We just want to like move on. It's fine. I just want to emphasize that, like, at every point, financially, with our time, with everything, we're going out of our way to try and be as flexible as we could be. But we get back to the house, the door is still not working, which again, I'll come back to later because that's an important part of what came to pass. And the whole energy, like, I'll never forget sitting outside with my husband and our baby and just feeling trapped. We didn't feel safe. We didn't feel like we trusted the landlord. I would write to them and say, hey, you know, the curtains aren't hung up, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but like, I'll never forget when we had a postpartum doula come and teach me how to breastfeed, and the gardeners were there and we have no curtains. So I'm sat there with my boobs out and the gardeners are outside, and I'm like trying to learn how to breastfeed while trying to hide from the gardeners. Like, it was horrible. So I'm asking them, hey, and I'm trying to be as friendly as possible. So I'm putting smiley faces and like trying to do all the things. I'm like, hey, like, whenever you get a chance, can you come fix the door and do the curtains? And they would mostly just not respond to me. And when they did, like, there was like 4 occasions that they were meant to come fix the door that they didn't. And again, this comes back into play later on. I would never ever have guessed that I would ever threaten to take someone to court. And to give you a little bit of a foreshadowing, that's the point where we ended up, where we were having to lawyer up and threaten to take this guy to court. I'll get into that in part 3. But this whole experience, like, I learned so much, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Like, it was horrific.